I can't be the only one who misses Rachel, can I? But, Sarah Shahi, who plays Rachel, or played Rachel in season 1, she now has a gig in Black Adam in a major role, so good on her, but I miss her. Drew here, and episode 2 of season 2 of City on a Hill, titled I Need a Goat. It's not like a mind-blowing episode. Again, there weren't really a ton of water cooler moments, but I enjoyed it. I think it was just solid character work and plot progression, although I think the first episode overall had more development. In some ways, I think that they maybe rushed the first episode a little bit, and there just wasn't that much to do in this episode. But this is probably a more typical episode for the season. To me, the show is at its most interesting when it's exploring the consequences of criminality on the families of the characters that are carrying out criminal acts. And I think that that's true this season as well, both with Anton and Kelvin and with Jimmy and Kathy, who I complained about last episode that I didn't really think that there was a place for Jimmy and Kathy in this season. And I feel like they do feel a little bit shoehorned in, but I do feel that their plot line is still largely more engaging than a lot of the other stuff in this show. I feel like there's not really a good place for the wives of cops and other characters in a show like this. I think that both DeCourcy's wife and Jackie Rohr's wife, their plot lines end up feeling obligatory and kind of like a waste of space to me personally. I think that these could be in any show, and while they might give us some indication of both the mentalities of Jackie and of DeCourcy, and they might, give us some insight into the state of their marriages, I just feel that the time spent on these plot lines is kind of a waste of space personally. But I am enjoying getting to see further development of Anton and Kelvin. I think it's pretty clear, the show has pretty consistently developed this, that Anton is more violent, more dangerous, and he's the one kind of driving Kelvin into this life. Kelvin seems like a reluctant participant to a large extent. And to me, I think the most interesting aspect is what's going to happen when their lives of crime affect their mother, Grace Campbell, who is this towering figure in their community, played very, very well by Pernell Walker. I really am enjoying this character and just seeing how she's someone who is powered by her faith, which gives her fearlessness in the light of threats on her life, and someone that is just standing up for the good of the community, protecting people when she thinks that misjustices are being carried out against them, and just trying to push the community forward. And what's tragic here is that when it comes out, and I'm sure it will, what her two sons are doing, it's not just going to affect her, it's going to affect the entire community. They brought up this episode when Kelvin got busted, that if he gets put away for a crime, then she'll lose a lot of her clout in the community, and the community will lose this loan that was going to help them get better developed housing. And to me, that's the real tragedy here, is that, these acts of crime that they're carrying out, they have all of these unintended consequences that Kelvin and Anton don't foresee. And at the end of the day, I have a suspicion that before the end of this season, their violence that they've kind of wreaked on other gangs is going to come back to roost in their own lives, and that potentially Grace is going to lose her life as a result of this. I think that was hinted at this episode during her conversation with Anton when he brought up the fact that, you keep approaching these people fearlessly, as we saw her do with this gang earlier in the episode, where she, fearlessly got them to clean up the graffiti and bribed them with candy in a very, very interesting scene. But, Anton is concerned, justifiably, because it just takes one person with a knife and she's a dead woman. And obviously she trusts in God to protect her, as many people do. But what she doesn't realize is that her own sons are immersed in this life of crime that could very easily, come back to haunt her. And, the behavior of both these characters, Kelvin and Anton, it's interesting because they have a good life. They don't really have to do this, but something about the allure of criminality, it's interesting to see how it pulls them in. I'm interested, I hope they give more insight into why these two characters chose to do this before the season is over. And I'm sure that they will, but at this point it's a little bit unclear, and I'd like to know, like, why would two young men who have what appears to be a very, very good and loving and law-abiding mother, why would they turn to this? And it's also interesting, I feel, that, you see in Calvin, as I said, someone who seems as though he doesn't really feel drawn to this life. In this scene where he's talking to one of his fellow gang members who says, I want to go to college, and I'm going to tell your brother and he can just replace me. And Calvin kind of implies, don't tell him, he will hurt you violently if you tell him. I thought it was interesting because on the one hand, you kind of get the sense that that's perhaps why Kelvin hasn't left, because he knows that if he tries to get away, Anton will respond violently against him, or that he just won't let him out, or maybe he feels a misguided sense of loyalty. In any case, he clearly doesn't seem too fond of this lifestyle. He seems a lot more frightened and a lot less prone to use violence than his brother does. And it was funny because this scene, I felt like they were setting up the person who was in the car with him. Whenever someone says, I want to get out of the gang life and go to college, I thought he was going to get killed, like in the next scene in a shootout or something. Or I thought he was going to get busted by the cops. And we would see, another life ruined by, crime, unable to escape a life of crime. But it was Kelvin that got busted. And it was interesting the way that this played out, because you obviously have DeCourcy's wife going to bat for him and, assuming that the people in law enforcement are only going after him because of the color of his skin, when in reality, he actually is a criminal and has actually done things where he deserves to, go to prison. And it's an interesting situation in a large extent, because I think that you can trace this event to what happened last episode, where the FBI grabbed this young woman who had done nothing wrong, and they knew she probably had done nothing wrong, but they were willing to, allow her to rot in jail over it because of the color of her skin and because they felt like she could be someone easily turned into an informant. And to me, the lessons are twofold. One, don't assume that everything is about race. Sometimes when someone gets in trouble, it's actually because of things they have done. It's not because of the color of their skin. But two, if you actually want to get people put away for things that they have done, don't put away people just for the color of their skin, because you're undercutting your ability to actually carry out justice when you persecute people unjustly. Otherwise, I feel like we're seeing the continued effects of the events of season 1 and how that's affecting Kathy and Jimmy. And to me, a lot of this felt shoehorned in. Like, I really don't feel that Kelvin and Anton would work with Jimmy. They know he's a snitch. Like, obviously, that one way this could have worked out is if they didn't know he was a snitch and they were just working with him because they weren't aware of what he did. But they know he's a snitch. They know he got his own family put in prison, and they're still working with him in a situation where he could easily turn on them and get them put away. So to me, I just don't think they would work with him. I think they'd bury him before they would work with him, to be honest. But I also feel that it feels a little bit shoehorned in that I don't think Kathy would forgive Jimmy. I don't think she would have anything to do with him. But, once I accept these improbabilities or things that I just don't think would happen, rather, I feel like this is an interesting plot line, because there's a lot of tension here, because there's this tension of, how is this going to play out for Kathy? I'm not sure what her thought process is. She sees someone commit suicide while under the influence of substances, and then she's like, I'm going to get some substances to sell to these people. But it will be interesting to see how things play out in her relationship with Jimmy. At this point, she still clearly hasn't forgiven him. She's using him to get what she wants. But it will be, I think, one of the more fascinating character arcs to see if Jimmy can work back in with her, and if he finds himself in a situation where the only way out for him is to turn on family again, if he will have changed to the point where he will die rather than turn on family because of the mistake he made last time, or if he's, going to do the exact same thing again. In any case, I think that, the dynamic between these two characters is pretty engaging, and I think that the tension of the fact that he owes Anton product, I feel like that's going to have a payoff that will be fascinating to see play out. I mentioned how I feel like the plot lines involving the wives, I feel like these are kind of not great plot lines, mainly because they could be in any show. I like Jill Hennessy and I like Lauren E. Banks. I think they're both giving great performances, but largely I just think in a show like this where it's focused on crime and punishment to a large extent, I feel that the wives of the main characters typically don't have a lot to do unless they're the wives of the criminals. I think seeing how the lives of crime have affected Kathy and are going to affect the mother, Grace, that's interesting. I feel that the wives of cops and just seeing marital dysfunction that could be, going on in any career, I just don't know that how interesting that is. I also feel, like I said, I like Jill Hennessy and her performance. I think that they're giving you a little bit of insight into the marital dysfunction going on in both cases, as Siobhan wants to have a child and you see DeCourcy not really ready to do that. But to a large extent, like I said, this plotline could be in any show, and I always feel frustrated with these kinds of plot lines that could be in any show. I feel like the fact that they're giving these plot lines so much weight is just a sign that they want to give the actors something to do, and also that they have to fill a full season order. And to me, don't waste my time, please. But regardless, they have this plot line with Jenny this episode where she's deciding that maybe she should try singing and she considers getting singing lessons. And I just always find these kinds of plot lines a little bit ridiculous because there's so many singers out there in the world. We don't really need more, prodigies who are just like discovering late in life that they could be a professional singer. I feel like this is always such a odd thing. And the final scene, they ended this episode on this song sung by Jenny. And to me, I felt like the moment felt a little bit forced. And there was just I couldn't suspend my disbelief that she was actually singing. If it was actually her voice, then they clearly used auto-tune so much that it didn't sound like her voice, but I think more likely she was being dubbed. So to me, this just felt more like a forced moment than something organic. I like episodes ending on musical numbers usually, even in this type of show, but this particular one to me didn't really work. Otherwise, this episode, things continue to heat up between DeCourcy and Jackie Rohr, and I feel to a large extent that this was kind of a status quo episode where they both tried to make moves and counter moves and they kind of got things into position, but nothing ever really got altered this episode. They had a couple, scenes where they faced off and kind of butted heads a little, but for the most part, the status quo was maintained. Obviously, we had a scene where Aldis Hodges, DeCourcy approaches this new U.S. attorney, Karen Shimizu, and to me, I kind of suspect that they're setting up DeCourcy and Rohr to partner up to get her out by the end of the season because they've really not made her very likable so far. She just comes off as a stone cold, arrogant jerk. To me, I understand that she seems like someone who is a stickler for the rules, and I hate when characters that are a stickler for the rules get portrayed this way, but the way that she interacted with DeCourcy just seemed really unfair to him, and obviously, he did threaten her, so I have to give her a little bit of graciousness for that. Like, I feel like if someone came to me and said, I'm coming after you because you're coming after me, I don't know what my response would be. But, these are two people that are both trying to do their jobs, and I feel like the show maybe didn't need to create artificial drama between these characters. But again, my theory is that maybe she's going to be the one that drives Rohr and DeCourcy to working together again as they have this common person that they don't get along with. But otherwise, you see DeCourcy making moves to try and get Rohr for what happened with him dumping the attorney lady off at the hospital, and we see Rohr trying to hunt out dark skeletons in DeCourcy's past, but there really don't seem to be any, so he kind of failed on that note. So overall, I felt like this episode was solid character building and solid plot progression, but not really anything particularly remarkable this episode. Moves and counter moves between these two that didn't really result in any big, in any big developments. But what did you think? Let me know in the comments. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of this show and other shows, please consider subscribing. And as always, thank you for watching.